Hello, this is Captain Chaudhari. Today I'm going to speak about the SOx, sulfur oxides. Sulfur oxides, as you know, is one of the constituents of the exhaust gases that is released from the ship, and sulfur related gases, sulfur oxide related gases, they are bad for human health. They cause respiration and other problems. So particularly for those areas which are close to the shipping and densely populated, these gases can cause more harm. So what is IMO? What has IMO done about the control of these SOx or sulfur oxide gases? First of all, let us understand the definition of fuel. Fuel oil means fuel that is delivered on the ship for combustion purposes, for the propulsion of the engine and other operations. So the regulation 14 of Annex 6, SOx and particulate matter, relates to the fuel oil which is used on board ships in various equipment like main engine, auxiliary engine, boiler and inert gas generator. The provision, however, does not apply to the fuel oil that is carried as cargo. So the regulations want that the sulfur dioxide that is emitted in the atmosphere, mass by mass, is curtailed to the provided limits. These limits have changed from time to time. So the regulations which apply in respect of emission of sulfur dioxide and particulate matter can be considered as the regulations which apply outside the ECAs, that is emission control areas, and the regulations which apply inside the emission control areas. And once again, the control can be done by two methods. One is by primary methods and other one is by secondary method. Primary method means the fuel that is supplied to the ship. The fuel that is supplied to the ship is deficient in sulfur, and the secondary means of applying the control is, number one, on board, if the fuel can be blended with some low sulfur fuel so that the final output, fuel that is burnt is low in sulfur, or probably some additives are added to the fuel, and these additives, when they are added to the fuel, the final sulfur content is deficient, or you have a scrubber unit fitted on the ship. Scrubber unit means you are using normal fuel, normal heavy oil or diesel oil, but when the exhaust is formed, it is passed through the scrubber. It is passed through the scrubber so that the final sulfur dioxide content in the atmosphere is in the limit. Now we must understand that through the years, they have been controlled on the emission of SOx M by M, that is mass by mass. Now first let us understand what was the limit that was permitted outside the ECAs, that is emission control areas. So prior to 1st January 2012, the permitted limit was 4.5% M/M, which on the 1st January 2012 became 3.5% M by M, that is mass by mass. And that limit was to be reduced to 0.5% M/M by 1st January 2020, subject to an assessment, which became, of course, successful. Later on, MEPC said that this is possible and the limit would be 0.5% M/M by 1st January 2020. Now the limits were supposed to be different in ECAs. The limit was already supposed to be less than 0.1% M/M by 2015. So what was the limit prior to this in the ECAs? In the ECA, prior to 1st July 2010, the limit was 1.5%, which became 1% after 1st July 2010. So new limit of 2020, 0.5% M/M was definitely a significant milestone in improving and controlling the quality of the exhaust gas in respect of SOx. Now, as you know, Annex 6 deals with various kinds of emissions, for example, carbon dioxide in respect of greenhouse gases and the efficiency of the ship, and NOx, it is dealt with the NOx technical code, etc. But SOx, particularly in respect of human health, it can cause cardiovascular or respiratory disease, and even if it is there in the atmosphere, it is not inhaled by the masses, it can result in the acid rain subsequently, and it would affect the vegetation and the species, the seawater species. So definitely SOx should be controlled. Now there are 4 ECAs in respect of SOx and particulate matter, starting with Baltic ECA, then there is North Sea ECA, and then there is United States emission control areas in respect of designated coastal areas of US and Canada, and then there is US Caribbean, including the Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands. Now there is a large number of ships which pass through Mediterranean. So what happened in 2022? MEPC 79 adopted Mediterranean as emission control area for SOx and particulate matter, which means all the ships which are passing through the Mediterranean will have to exercise this control in respect of emissions. So the new amendments in respect of Annex 6 are expected to enter on 1st May 2024, which means that the new limits in respect of SOx are going to be effective from 1st May 2025. It is estimated that this reduction, this new limits are going to reduce the emission of SOx by 77%, which means that it is going to reduce the emission in terms of mass equivalent to 8.5 million metric tons. That is hell of a lot. So the refineries can do this work of blending the normal fuel with a fuel that is extremely deficient in sulfur, so that when it is blended, when the two fuel oils are blended and used on board ship, the SOx that is emitted is in control. Alternately, the additives can be mixed with the fuel, to increase certain properties like lubricity. But it should be noted that, the final product is not harmful. It does not cause more harm than the benefit, So that has to be approved. It has to be approved that what additives you are going to use. In October 2018, MEPC adopted an amendment which means that the ships cannot carry for combustion purposes the fuel that would give out SOx which is not in the limit unless you have a scrubber. This amendment has entered into force in March 2020, which means that thereafter the ships either have the scrubber which is doing its job of controlling the SOx emission, or you're using a fuel that is deficient in sulfur. So when you have scrubber, what do you do with the SOx gases? Probably you will mix it with water or some kind of solvent, and probably the output would be the contaminated water or acidic water. So are you going to pump it out? So you should have two arrangements. One of the arrangements is you hand it over ashore to the approved reception facilities, or you pump it out as allowed for pumping out. I mean, you are able to pump it out under the regulations of MARPOL. Now, as you know, the latest guidelines which are given to the Port State Control of 2019, they have this Appendix 4 in respect of Annex 2 and Appendix 18 in respect of Annex 6. Now, ISO standard 8217 is to be followed in respect of the quality of the fuel oil that you receive on board. Now, this ISO standard 8217 would provide the characteristics of the fuel oil in respect of kinematic viscosity, cold flow properties, stability, ignition characteristics, and catalyst fines. Additionally, provides considerations on the compatibility between fuels and gives additional information on ISO 8217. These comprehensive guidelines include a template for a fuel oil non-availability report (FONAR) set out in Appendix 1, and a technical review of identified possible potential safety implications associated with the use of 2020 compliant fuels set out in Appendix 2. The ship implementation planning guidance includes sections on risk assessment and mitigation plan, impact of new fuels, fuel oil system modification and tank cleaning if needed, fuel oil capability and segregation capability, procurement of compliant fuel, fuel oil changeover plan, conventional residual fuel oils to 0.5% sulfur compliant fuel oil, and documentation and reporting. So I was telling you the wash water through the scrubber should meet a criteria in respect of pH values. There are also strict limit on discharge of PAH, that is polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons and nitrates. In 2021, MEPC adopted the updated guidelines for exhaust gas cleaning system, which specifies the criteria for testing, survey, certification and verification of ECAs as well as the discharge water quality criteria. Now there is a greater responsibility on the ship's engineer in respect of segregation of the oil. If you have different grades of oil, one for ECA and one for outside ECA. Even outside ECA the limit is low, as you know. But when you enter the ECA, till you are in ECA and you exit out of ECA, whenever you are using any fuel, it should be logged down that when did you and how did you change over to the low sulfur fuel, and a strict logging down and monitoring of the system is what is required.